My name is Nora. I'm 32, and I run operations for a restaurant group that serves 3,000 guests a week across 4 locations. The path a check takes from the kitchen to the table is something I understand on instinct, the way most people understand how to tie their shoes. So when my parents shattered 3 years of dead silence and invited me to a dinner where they planned to make amends, there was one question I should have asked before I said yes. Who is actually going to be sitting at that table? I never asked it. I drove 40 minutes to the Belvedere, walked in through the front doors, and found 16 members of my family already gathered around a long table loaded with lobster tails, Wagyu steaks, and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux they'd uncorked and begun pouring before my car even reached the lot. My father glanced up from the head of the table, smiled, and delivered the line I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my way out of. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." He was sure he had me trapped. What he hadn't planned for were the 2 sentences I was about to murmur to our waiter, or what his own credit card was going to confess to the whole family about 15 minutes later. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Stories, where ordinary people walk into impossible family moments and walk back out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, to stay quiet, this story is for you. Leave a comment below and make sure you subscribe. Let me back up a few weeks, though, before the dinner, before the parking lot full of cars I knew on sight, before my father tried to slide me a bill the size of a mortgage payment. I need to tell you who I was the morning that invitation arrived, because that woman was exactly the version of me they were betting on, and exactly the version I'd already left behind. I manage 4 restaurants. Manage, not own. I worked my way up from bussing tables at a steakhouse in Knoxville at 17, still carrying the smell of fryer oil onto the school bus the next morning. Hostess at 19, server at 21, floor manager by 24, regional operations director by 30. I'm not rich. I have a 2-bedroom condo fully paid off, a retirement account I never dip into, and exactly 1 indulgence: sparkling water. Still or sparkling? That's what I order every single time I sit down to eat out. My staff think it's a quirk. It isn't. When you grow up footing the bill for everyone else's steak, you learn to keep your own tab small enough that you can always stand up and walk away from it. That morning, I was at my desk, going over a vendor contract for imported olive oil. The kind of ordinary Tuesday that lets you forget not everyone's life runs on spreadsheets and par levels. My phone buzzed. I looked down and something cold settled behind my ribs. 3 years of silence, and there it was. A notification from the group chat I'd been thrown out of the day I officially became the family villain. Family added you to the chat. I stared at it for a full minute before I tapped it open. Family. The little red heart emoji my mother had chosen 6 years earlier, back when she first built the group, back when it was for Thanksgiving recipes and photos of Brooke's dog. I hadn't laid eyes on that heart in 3 years. The chat history was wiped clean. Nothing above my mother's newest message, which meant they'd either deleted everything or, far more likely, they'd been running a second group without me in it the entire time. Mom's message was warm, careful, almost rehearsed. She wrote that she and Dad had been doing a lot of reflecting and wanted to invite me to dinner at the Belvedere so the family could begin healing. Just the 4 of us, she said. Her, Dad, me, and Brooke. A small dinner. A fresh start. Then a second message landed 30 seconds later with the line that should have told me everything. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. Family takes care of family. She used to say that when I was 19 and she needed my tip money to cover the electric bill. She said it when I was 23 and Dad needed a cosigner on the truck. She said it when Brooke's first apartment fell through and I quietly covered the deposit. In my house, family takes care of family had only ever meant one thing. Nora takes care of family. I read the message twice. I noticed that my mother hadn't said sorry. She hadn't said we were wrong. She'd said it was time to heal. Passive voice, no subject, nobody actually on the hook for anything. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the olive oil contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 3 years before, my sister Brooke had decided to open a cafe. No business plan, no market study, a cafe because she'd wandered into one in Charleston with exposed brick and a matcha menu and thought, I could do that. She was 26, had never run so much as a lemonade stand, and needed a $75,000 small business loan. The bank approved it on one condition, a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. Mom called on a Sunday. Dad sat beside her, arms folded, angry before I'd even picked up. Brooke needed the loan. The cafe was her dream. I had good credit, a steady job, a long track record of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Nora. I asked to see a business plan first. There wasn't one. I asked about projected margins, lease terms, supplier contracts. Brooke looked at me like I'd insulted her cooking. My mother's voice went flat. She's your sister. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your sister. I said no. Not because I didn't love Brooke, I did. But I'd spent enough years in this industry watching people pour their savings into concepts with nothing underneath them. And I knew exactly what $75,000 of someone else's debt feels like at 3 a.m, when the cafe is dark and the loan is still due. Dad stood up. He pointed at the door and said the words that sealed it shut for 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. By the next morning, I'd been removed from family. Nobody called, nobody texted. For 3 years, I was the daughter who loved money more than her own sister. Here's the part that's hard to admit. The silence almost broke me. Not because they were right. I knew they weren't. It broke me because I missed being needed. That's the real wound. And it took me 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Kwan to name it properly. I'd been the family fixer since I was 17. My first paycheck went to groceries. My tax refund went to Mom's dental work. When Dad's transmission blew, I paid for the rebuild and told him it was covered under warranty because I knew he'd never accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When Brooke got married, I covered the florist, the photographer, and half the reception. And I smiled while Mom raised a glass and toasted to raising 2 strong girls. 2 strong girls, 1 bill. I didn't do any of it because I'm generous. I did it because somewhere around 15, I'd figured out that the surest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure nobody ever had to ask twice. Ask once, Nora pays, everybody's happy, dinner stays quiet. I trained them. I taught my own parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt, receive a check. And when that machine finally flashed out of order, they didn't try to fix it. They unplugged it and walked away. So when Mom's message surfaced after 3 years, family takes care of family, sweetheart, the old reflex fired in my chest like a muscle I hadn't stretched in years. Go fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make it quiet again. But underneath it, I could also hear Dr. Kwan, steady as a metronome. You taught them you would always pay. That's the thing you have to fix. Not by paying more, by stopping. My coworker Jess told me not to go. She sat across from me at lunch the day after the invitation came and said, "Nora, this has ambush written all over it." I laughed because Jess had never even met my family and she could already see it more clearly than I could. My sous chef, Marco, put it more briefly. Don't. But I'd already made up my mind. Not because I believed them, and not because I expected an apology. I wanted to sit across from my parents and find out whether 3 years had changed anything, or whether the silence had just been a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had. The one where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I wanted closure, even if closure only meant confirming the door was nailed shut. And there was something else, too. And I'm going to be honest about it because I think some of you will understand. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated everything, not the one who kept score. I missed the one who taught me to make cornbread in a cast-iron skillet when I was 9, singing along to Dolly Parton while the butter melted. That mother hadn't called in 3 years either. But some nights I could still hear the Dolly Parton. So I told Jess I was going. I told Marco I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing and almost believed it. I set one rule: 1 dinner, civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I'd leave before dessert. I wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to my steering wheel the morning of. 1 dinner, then home. That sticky note was still there when I pulled into the Belvedere's lot and started counting cars. I dressed plain on purpose. Black slacks, a gray blouse I wear to vendor meetings, flat shoes, no jewelry except the small silver watch I bought myself the year I made regional director. Not to impress anyone, but because I'd earned it, and it kept good time, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Belvedere looking like I was putting on a show. My family already believed I flaunted my success. The truth was that I drove a 9-year-old Honda and meal prepped on Sundays like half the country. The drive took 40 minutes. I played no music. My hands stayed at 10 and 2 the whole way. Somewhere around the highway merge, my stomach tightened in a way I recognized. The exact feeling I get when a walk-in cooler dies on a Friday night and I know the next 6 hours are going to hurt. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still negotiating with. I almost turned around at the exit ramp. Almost. But I thought about that cornbread, and I thought about Dr. Kwan's voice, and I kept driving. The Belvedere sat at the end of a strip of shops I hadn't visited in years, the expensive side of town, where the parking lot is landscaped and the hostesses all wear black. Dad's truck was in the 3rd row, Mom's sedan beside it. Fine. Then I spotted Aunt Linda's white Buick, Uncle Greg's SUV, Brooke's hatchback, still wearing the bumper sticker from the cafe that had folded 11 months after it opened. 3 more cars I knew on sight. 2 I didn't. My stomach dropped before I even reached for the handle. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I counted 9 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, reading that sticky note. 1 dinner, then home. The smart move would have been to back out of the lot, drive the 40 minutes home, eat leftover soup, and never give another thought to the Mayfield family reunion I hadn't been invited to. Or, apparently, had been invited to, just without being told the guest list. But I got out. I smoothed my blouse. I locked the car and walked toward the entrance. Because I was 32 years old, I'd spent 3 years learning how not to run, and I was not about to start running again in a restaurant parking lot on a Thursday evening. The front doors were heavy glass with brass handles, the kind that whisper entrees start at $42 before you've even seen a menu. Inside, the lobby smelled like rosemary and warm bread and money. A hostess in a black dress smiled and checked her screen. "Mayfield." I nodded. She nodded back. "Your party's already seated." She said it the way hostesses say things when they've been managing a large group for an hour and are working very hard not to look stressed. I knew that expression. I'd worn it 1,000 times. She grabbed a menu, just one, and led me toward the back of the dining room. I heard them before I saw them. Laughter, clinking glasses, my Aunt Linda's unmistakable cackle slicing through the murmur of every other table. One dinner, then home. I rounded the corner and there it was. 16 chairs, every one filled except the one at the far end, directly across from my father. The table ran the entire length of the private alcove. White linen, heavy silverware, candles in low crystal holders. There were platters I could identify from 10 feet away. Lobster tails fanned across crushed ice, Wagyu sliders on a tiered stand, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table, and in the center, a bottle of wine I recognized from vendor tastings. A 2016 Bordeaux that runs around $400 at retail, already half gone. They'd been here a while. They'd been ordering hard. The hostess paused at the edge of the alcove and gave me a look that translates perfectly across every restaurant I've ever worked in. Good luck. Then she leaned in and said quietly, "Your father put a card down to hold the reservation. Just so you know, we require one for parties over 12. I filed that sentence away the way I file every operational detail. Silently, completely, permanently. His card was on record. He'd secured the table. And yet somehow, I already knew the bill wasn't meant to land on him. My mother saw me first. She rose with both arms wide open, and every head at the table turned. "Nora, oh sweetheart, look at you!" Applause. Actual applause. Like I was a soldier coming home, and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 1,000 days. Uncle Greg whistled. Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. Brooke lifted her wineglass and smiled. The kind of smile that has teeth but no warmth in it. 16 people. Lobster and Wagyu and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 16 people are watching, the chairs already pulled out, and a waiter is pouring water into your glass before your purse hits the floor? I sat down and I smiled, because that's what 15 years of front-of-house training gives you. The ability to smile while your brain runs a full threat assessment underneath it. Mom settled back into her seat, beaming. We wanted it to be a surprise, the whole family together, just like old times. I thought it was just the 4 of us, I said. Mom waved a hand like she was shooing a fly. Well, once Linda heard, and then Greg, and then your cousin Tara, it just grew. You know how family is. I knew exactly how family was. I scanned the table. Dad sat at the head, carving a Wagyu slider like it was a Thanksgiving turkey. Brooke sat to his left, phone in one hand, wine in the other, scrolling through something I couldn't see. Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg anchored the middle. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since a Thanksgiving 5 years ago filled the rest. Tyler, Megan, Jake, 2 wives I'd met exactly once, and a neighbor of Aunt Linda's I'd never seen before in my life, but who was apparently eating lobster on the occasion of whatever this was. The wine was flowing. The platters were half demolished. They'd been here at least an hour before I arrived, and they'd ordered everything on the menu that didn't require a second mortgage. Mom leaned across and squeezed my hand. See? Family takes care of family. There it was again. The same 5 words, the same warm packaging, aimed at the same target. I squeezed back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father is the kind of man who orders for the table. Not asks, orders. He waved the waiter over, a kid barely out of his teens who looked like he was running on caffeine and anxiety, and rattled off additions without so much as glancing at a menu. Another round of the lobster tails, 2 more Wagyu plates, and bring another bottle of that Bordeaux. The good one. The good one. Loud enough for the tables on either side of us to hear. Then he slid his credit card out of his wallet and held it up between 2 fingers, like a magician showing the audience a coin before the trick. "Put it all on this," he told the waiter. "We're celebrating tonight." The waiter, his name tag read Nathan, scribbled, nodded, and disappeared toward the kitchen with the look of a man who badly needed a smoke break. I watched my father tuck the card back into his wallet and give it a little pat, the way you pat a dog that's just done its trick well. Something was off. I'd grown up watching Dad argue over the price of a muffler. I'd seen him return a shirt because the sale tag was missing. Raymond Mayfield did not order $400 bottles of wine. He did not wave credit cards around like flags. This was a performance, and it was aimed squarely at me. "Look how well we're doing, Nora. Look how little we ever needed you." Except the truck in the lot was the same one from 5 years ago, with the same dent in the rear quarter panel he'd never bothered to fix. And Mom's handbag, the Coach purse she'd carried since I was in high school, sat on the chair beside her with a cracked strap held together by a safety pin. They were performing. I just didn't know the price of admission yet. The small cut started around the second bottle. Aunt Linda leaned past Uncle Greg and said, "Must be nice, running all those fancy restaurants while the rest of us clip coupons." She laughed when she said it, the way people laugh when they want you to know they mean it. Cousin Megan asked whether I ever felt guilty, living so well while my parents were going through such a rough patch. I didn't know about a rough patch. Nobody had told me about a rough patch. Brooke, without lifting her eyes from her phone, added, "She wouldn't know. She hasn't been around." Each remark landed with the precision of something rehearsed. Not scripted exactly, but aligned, the way a choir finds the same note without anyone waving a baton. They'd been talking about me, about my absence, my money, my life. And they'd shown up tonight already sharing the same version of the story. Nora left, Nora has plenty, Nora owes. Aunt Linda delivered the thesis statement. She reached across the table, took my hand the way you'd hold someone's hand at a funeral, and said, "Family doesn't keep score, dear." I almost laughed. Family doesn't keep score. This from a woman who once stopped speaking to her own daughter-in-law for 6 months over a Thanksgiving seating chart. I didn't laugh. I gently slid my hand free and picked up my glass. Sparkling water. The only thing in front of me. The only thing I'd ordered. The contrast was almost funny. 16 people swimming in lobster and Bordeaux, and me at the end of the table with a glass of San Pellegrino, like the designated driver at a bachelor party. Nathan passed behind me and I caught his eye. "Just the water tonight?" he asked, quiet. "Just the water," I said. He nodded, the way you nod when you understand something that hasn't been said out loud. Let me tell you about Nathan. He was maybe 19, 20, built thin the way restaurant kids are before they learn to eat between rushes. He moved fast but careful, the way new servers move when the table is too big and the order too complicated, and they know one wrong plate means a manager conversation they can't afford. I recognized everything about him because I'd been him. 17 years old, 2 tables deep, learning that the guests who snap their fingers are always the ones who tip the least. He was running our 16 top alone, well, almost alone. A busser surfaced now and then to clear plates, but Nathan handled every order, every refill, "Excuse me, can we get more butter?" And Aunt Linda had said that one 3 times in 20 minutes. He never complained, never sighed. He refilled my sparkling water without being asked, and when he set the glass back down, he caught me watching the table with an expression I probably should have hidden better. "Long night," he murmured. I almost told him the truth. Instead, I just said, "You're doing great." He blinked, startled, like he'd forgotten customers could say that, then straightened up about half an inch taller and moved on to refill Uncle Greg's glass. I watched him go and thought about the version of me who used to carry 4 plates up her forearm and cry in the walk-in freezer on the hard nights. That girl had no idea she'd end up on the other side of a table like this one, sitting across from the family that turned her into a fixer and a funder, asked, without being asked, to write one more check. But she'd understand what I was about to do. She'd understand it perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom around the 40-minute mark. I needed 2 minutes without Aunt Linda's commentary and a door I could lock. The Belvedere's restroom was the kind with cloth hand towels and lavender soap and a full-length mirror that made you look slightly better than you felt. A neat trick, considering I felt like I was digesting glass. I ran the faucet and pressed cold water to my wrists, the way you do when you need your heart rate to start cooperating with your brain. And then I saw it. A phone on the edge of the marble counter, screen still lit, case covered in daisy stickers. Brooke's phone. She must have come in just before me and left it when she got distracted. Brooke left things everywhere. It was one of the few traits we shared. I hadn't planned to look. I want to be clear about that. But the screen was bright, and the notification banner across the top came from a group chat I'd never been added to, and the preview text was enough to freeze my hand halfway to the paper towels. The group was called Dinner Plan. 3 members: Mom, Dad, Brooke. The most recent message, sent 4 days ago from Mom, showed words I can still recite from memory. "Don't tell Nora it's everyone. She won't dare." The preview cut off at the edge of the banner. My pulse stayed steady. My hands were dry. I picked up the phone the way I'd pick up a vendor invoice that didn't add up. Not angry, not even surprised, just confirming what the numbers had already told me. I scrolled up. The full message read, "Don't tell Nora it's everyone. Once she's there with the whole family watching, she won't dare say no. She never could handle a scene." Beneath it, Dad had replied, "Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask." Brooke's contribution, time-stamped 2 minutes later. "Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back. LOL." I kept scrolling. 3 weeks of messages. Mom coordinating RSVPs. Linda's in, Greg's in. Megan says yes if there's wine. Dad quieter, mostly logistics. Parking, reservation time, how to frame the invitation so it sounded casual. And then the messages that turned my stomach cold. Mom, 10 days ago. "The bank called again Thursday. We need to figure out something before June." Dad, "Nora can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." And the one that landed like a bag of gravel dropped off a shelf. Mom again, 8 days ago. "It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance." Grateful. They wanted me to be grateful for the privilege of being tricked into a 16-person dinner at a restaurant I never would have chosen, so I could pay a bill I hadn't ordered, to fix a crisis nobody had told me about, for a family that cut me off the last time I said no. I set Brooke's phone back on the counter, screen down, exactly where I'd found it. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in that flattering mirror and I thought, I know what you're doing. I know what this costs. And for the first time in 15 years, I am not going to pay it. I stood in that bathroom holding the truth in both hands, and the strangest part was how calm I felt. Not numb, not furious, just clear, the way a kitchen goes quiet in the half second before the dinner rush. Everything in position, nothing wasted, every station ready. If you've ever found out you were loved for what you could provide and not for who you are, you know exactly how cold that tile floor felt under my shoes. Stay with me, subscribe, because what I did next, I planned in the time it takes to dry your hands. I walked back to the table wearing the same face I put on when a health inspector arrives unannounced. Pleasant, unreadable, fully operational. Nobody noticed a thing. Aunt Linda was deep into a story about her neighbor's divorce. Uncle Greg was working through his third lobster tail. Brooke had reclaimed her phone and was scrolling again, oblivious. But now I noticed things I hadn't before, or hadn't let myself see. Mom kept glancing at Dad's wallet on the table, quick little flicks of her eyes, like she was watching a countdown. Dad's laugh ran half a beat too loud, the way people laugh when they're nervous and covering it with volume. The second wine bottle was nearly empty, and nobody had suggested slowing down. Because why would they? They weren't paying. I was paying. That was the entire point of the evening. And every lobster tail, every Wagyu slider, every pour of that $400 Bordeaux was one more brick in the wall they were building around me, high enough that I couldn't climb out without making the scene I'd spent my whole life avoiding. So I started asking questions, casual ones, the kind you ask when you're catching up after 3 years, not the kind you ask when you already know the answers and you're just watching people lie. How's the cafe, Brooke? Brooke's glass paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, we closed. The market just wasn't there. She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage she'd rehearsed removing. That's too bad. How long did it last? 11 months. Mom jumped in before the silence could settle. Brooke's exploring other options. She has so many talents. I nodded. Then I turned to Dad. How's the contracting business? Still doing the commercial builds? Dad's jaw tightened for half a second, a tell I'd cataloged before I was old enough to drive. Between projects right now. Economy's been tough. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew because I'd just read the bank called again Thursday on his wife's phone 10 minutes earlier. Because the dent in his truck was still there. Because the man who'd ordered 2 rounds of lobster and a $400 bottle of wine was sitting across from me, performing solvency the way a community theater actor performs Shakespeare. Loud, committed, and completely unconvincing to anyone who's seen the real thing. I just nodded and let them keep talking. People tell you everything when they think you're the bank. They told me about the kitchen renovation they'd put on hold, about the vacation they'd decided to skip this year, about how things had been a little tight, but nothing we can't handle. Every sentence was a window into a house I could now see was on fire, and they were all out on the lawn, insisting the smoke was barbecue. The pressure built the way it always does in my family, never with a direct question, always with a current. Little comments all pushing in the same direction, casual enough to deny, coordinated enough to corner. Aunt Linda sighed and said, "Must be so rewarding doing well for yourself like that. Some of us aren't so lucky." Cousin Tyler, who I hadn't spoken to since Obama's second term, chimed in. "Yeah, Nora, you really landed on your feet. That's awesome." Even Uncle Greg, who normally communicates exclusively through sports metaphors, managed a, "You hit a home run out there, kid." Each compliment was a brick. Each brick pointed the same way. You have money, we see it, and we're reminding you in front of witnesses. Mom conducted from the center of the table like someone who'd memorized the score. A nod toward Linda, a smile at Tyler, a gentle hand on Dad's arm whenever he started to speak too soon. She was good. She'd always been good. I used to think my mother was just a warm woman who liked to host. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 20-year track record, and her single biggest deliverable was sitting at the end of the table drinking sparkling water. The dessert menus arrived. Aunt Linda ordered crème brûlée without glancing at the price. Brooke asked for the chocolate soufflé, which needs a 20-minute lead time, which meant she'd ordered it before I'd even sat down. Of course she had. They were running up the tab the way you do when someone else is paying. No ceiling, no guilt, not a single glance at the right-hand column of the menu. My sparkling water was down to the ice. Brooke was the one who finally cracked the surface. She'd had 3 glasses of the Bordeaux by then, enough to sand down whatever filter she normally kept between her brain and her mouth, which had never been especially thick to begin with. She leaned across the table, glass in hand, and grinned at me like we were sharing a private joke. "Relax, big sister. It's just dinner. You can afford it." I set my water down. Afford what? This. She gestured at the table. The platters, the wine, the 16 place settings, the crème brûlée and chocolate soufflé being assembled right then by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it so casually. "Since you're treating." Like it had been settled in a meeting I wasn't invited to, which, of course, it had been. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long until you're the one sitting inside it. Mom shot Brooke a look that said, "Too early." Brooke shrugged, like she'd bumped a vase she had no intention of catching. Uncle Greg studied his lobster. Aunt Linda suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Dad cleared his throat. The silence lasted just long enough for Nathan to arrive with a fresh bottle of sparkling water and set it beside my glass, and for me to register 2 things. First, that Nathan was the only person at this table who had poured me anything without expecting something in return. And second, that Brooke had just confirmed out loud what every single person in that room already knew. I was the mark. The whole dinner was a heist, and every lobster tail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for Cousin Megan when it landed. She was genuinely trying to make conversation, I think, because Megan was the one family member who'd sent me a birthday text during the 2nd year of the silence. A short, "thinking of you," I'd never replied to and still felt guilty about. "So, Nora, Mom said you got a big promotion. Something about running a bunch of restaurants now?" I kept it simple. "Regional Operations Director, 4 locations." Megan nodded, impressed. "That's amazing. Like, you're in charge of all of them?" "Staffing, vendors, compliance, financials, everything from the loading dock to the check." I said it the way I'd say it in a meeting. Factual, no polish. But the word financials hit that table like a rock through a window. Aunt Linda's fork stopped. Uncle Greg looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Brooke's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, reweighing, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They'd built the whole evening on the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it, the scope, the authority, the specificity of what I actually do, was a different thing from assuming it. They'd pictured a well-paid waitress who'd gotten lucky. They hadn't pictured someone who could read a P&L statement faster than they could read a menu, who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house, who knew, down to the cent, exactly what 16 lobster tails and 2 bottles of Bordeaux cost before the check ever arrived. The table recalibrated. I could feel it happening, like a shift in barometric pressure. The power hadn't moved yet, but it had loosened. Dad waited until dessert. He was strategic about it, I'll give him that. The soufflé had arrived. The crème brûlée was cracked. The second bottle of Bordeaux sat upside down in the ice bucket. The table was warm and full and slow with sugar and wine, every face soft with the particular contentment of a meal you didn't pay for and don't intend to. Dad set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I'd seen him make before signing contracts, before Thanksgiving speeches, before telling me at 23 that he needed a co-signer, just this once. He looked at me, not unkindly, not cruelly, with the exact expression of a man who believes he's being perfectly reasonable. "Nora," he smiled, "you're paying, right? You owe us that much." 5 words. You owe us that much. 16 people heard them. Nathan, refilling Aunt Linda's coffee behind me, heard them. The couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My mother nodded. My sister smirked. My aunt reached for another pat of butter, like the matter was settled. You owe us 3 years of silence. And not one person at that table had said they were sorry, or that they'd been wrong, or that they'd missed me for any reason that wasn't tied to my credit limit. You owe us that much. I looked at my father across a table buried under the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the decision I'd been so afraid to make had just been made for me. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a table of 16 shift in their seats, reach for their water glasses, and suddenly find something fascinating on the wall behind you. For 15 years, I'd paid so that nobody would ever make a scene. I'd picked up every check, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit and every dental bill and every florist invoice, because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one, full of staring, expectant faces, full of the unspoken understanding that Nora's love was measured in dollars, and Nora's silence was bought with compliance. 15 years, thousands of dollars, and the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $80 a plate, plus wine, plus lobster, plus the particular tax that comes with being the child they only call when something needs funding. I looked at my father's hands, still folded, still steady. I looked at my mother's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Brooke, already scrolling again, because as far as she was concerned, this was decided. I looked at Nathan, standing by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a young man who knows something important is happening at his table, but isn't sure what. Then I looked at my sparkling water, half full, catching the candlelight like a small, quiet promise I'd made to myself. I laid my napkin on the table. I smiled. "Let me go take care of things," I said, and stood up. Mom exhaled. Aunt Linda pressed a hand to her chest. Dad unfolded his hands. Every single one of them thought I was about to pay. Here's the thing 15 years behind a host stand teaches you. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd set the table, chosen the restaurant, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 16 people, 2 empty bottles of wine, and 3 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 2 sentences and a waiter named Nathan. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front register. I walked toward the service station at the back of the dining room, where Nathan was organizing check presenters and a floor manager named David was reviewing a ticket. David wore the standard uniform, black shirt, black tie, earpiece, and he had the look of a man who'd been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to him. I walked up to him. "Excuse me, David?" He turned, professional smile in place. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low, not dramatic, not conspiratorial, just the volume you use in the industry when you're handling something that doesn't need the dining room's attention. Nathan stood beside him, listening, eyes alert, a tray balanced on his hip. Both of them looked at me the way restaurant professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, precise attention. I said 2 sentences. "I'm not the host, and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation." David blinked once. He glanced at Nathan, then back at me. "And the second thing," I added, "split off just my sparkling water onto a separate check and add 30% to mine for your team. You've earned it tonight." Nathan's eyes widened slightly. David looked at me for 3 full seconds, reading the situation the way a good floor manager reads every situation. Fast, thorough, without judgment. Then he nodded. "Done." That was it. No argument, no hesitation, no, "Are you sure, ma'am?" Because David had been doing this long enough to know what a redirect looked like, and Nathan had been watching that table long enough to understand why one was needed. I paid my check on the spot, 1 sparkling water, 2 refills, plus a 30% tip that would turn out to be the largest Nathan got that month. David ran my card, handed me the receipt, and said quietly, "I'll present the table's check in about 10 minutes, once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Brooke was arguing with Cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Linda was telling Uncle Greg about her neighbor's fence dispute. Mom was watching me with the careful attention of someone who believes the check has been handled. Dad was leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied. 16 people eating dessert, finishing off a $400 bottle of wine, waiting for a bill they had no intention of ever seeing. I set my glass down and waited right along with them. Those 10 minutes were the most peaceful of my entire evening. The table didn't know it yet, but the meal was over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the wine was gone, the ask had been made, and the answer had already been delivered in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end and listened to my family talk. Aunt Linda complained about the price of mulch. Uncle Greg told a fishing story with no ending. Brooke took a selfie with the souffle remnants. Mom laughed at something. Cousin Megan laughed too. A real one, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her sound, for exactly 3 seconds, like the woman who used to sing Dolly Parton in the kitchen. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I looked at Dad, checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting for a text he didn't want to receive. And I remembered the message I'd read on Brooke's phone. "Nora can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." My sparkling water caught the candlelight again. I watched the bubbles rise and pop, one by one, each a tiny implosion nobody noticed. I thought about 17-year-old Nora in her apron, carrying 4 plates up her forearm, learning to smile through the burning in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. She'd have pulled out her card, covered the whole table, called it love, then gone home and cried in the shower and never told a soul. I wasn't that girl anymore. Nathan appeared at the edge of the alcove, and I knew before he took his first step exactly whose chair he was walking toward. He placed the check presenter, leather-bound, embossed with the Belvedere's logo, directly in front of my father. Not in the center of the table, not near me, in front of Raymond Mayfield, the man who'd made the reservation, whose card was on file, who'd told the table to put it all on this 2 hours earlier. The conversation died like a candle in a draft. Dad stared at the leather folio for 2 seconds. I could watch him processing it. The check was supposed to go to Nora. The check was supposed to go to Nora. The check is in front of me. Mom's eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the check, then at me again, and for the first time all night her composure cracked just enough to show the math running behind it. "Nora," she started. Dad recovered first. He was always good at recovering. He'd spent 63 years never once admitting he'd been caught off guard. He picked up the presenter, flicked it open with a casual gesture, and did not look at the total. He couldn't look at the total. If he looked at that number in front of 16 people, the performance would end. "I've got it," he said, sliding his credit card out with the same 2-fingered flourish he'd used earlier. He handed it to Nathan without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember?" Nathan took the card. "I'll be right back, sir." He said it gently, the way you say things when you know what's coming and the person across from you doesn't. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms, and smiled at me with the full confidence of a man who believed his card was about to save him. Nathan returned in 4 minutes. He stepped to my father's chair, leaned down, and said it at a volume meant to be discreet, but heard because the table had gone quiet enough to hear ice melt. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Nobody moved. Dad's smile held for 1 more second, a reflex, like a light that stays on after you flip the switch. Then it went out. "Run it again," he said. Nathan nodded. He disappeared. He came back in 2 minutes, same lean, same gentle voice. "I'm sorry, sir. It's still not going through. Would you like to try another card?" Dad reached for his wallet. His fingers moved through the slots, 1 card, then another, then a third he pulled from behind his driver's license like a last bullet from a chamber he'd forgotten was loaded. He handed it over. The table was silent. 16 people, no forks moving, no wine being poured, no laughter. Just the sound of Raymond Mayfield's 63 years of pride compressing into a wallet he couldn't close fast enough. Nathan came back a 3rd time. He didn't need to speak. His face said it. Dad looked at Nathan. Then he looked at me. Not with anger, not yet. With the raw, unguarded expression of a man who's just realized, in front of every person who matters to him, that the net he'd been counting on is gone, and the ground is exactly as hard as he'd always feared. He looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat that's already pulling away from the ship. I picked up my sparkling water, took a sip, set it down. "I don't owe you. I never did." Dad's chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound like tearing paper. "Nora." His voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank. You were supposed to. He stopped himself, but not fast enough. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, visible to everyone. You were supposed to pay. Mom started crying, not the quiet kind, the performative kind, with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from the surrounding tables. After everything we've done for you, after I carried you, how could you sit there and— What did you do for me, Mom? My voice stayed level. I didn't raise it. I didn't lean in. I stayed in my chair with both hands around my water glass. Tell me, in front of everyone, what did you do for me in the last 3 years? Brooke slammed her hand on the table. This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you. Aunt Linda reached for my arm. Nora, dear, your father is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just— No! One word. I said it the way I'd say it to a vendor who tried to short my invoice. Clear, final, and without apology. Then Dad broke. Not with anger this time, with something worse. His voice dropped, and for one terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a house with all the lights turned off. Nora, please. We're drowning. And I saw him. I saw the frightened man behind the performance, the father who'd lost his business and his pride and couldn't say either out loud until his credit card said it for him. I saw him, and I ached. Then he added, and you'd let us. And the ache stopped, because even drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up, not fast, not dramatic. The way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this— I gestured at the table, the empty platters, the upside-down wine bottles, the 16 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me to make amends. You invited me to make a payment. Mom's crying hardened into something else. That's not fair, Nora. We just wanted you back. You wanted me back for what I could cover, Mom. I read the messages. She can cover us through spring. The table went white. Brooke's face drained. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad stared at the tablecloth. If you need help, real help, I'll sit down with you and a financial counselor and we'll figure out a plan. No tricks, no audience, no lobster. But I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it. I wasn't told about it. And I don't owe it to you. I don't owe you. I never did. Nobody spoke. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother and said the last thing I'd say to her at that table. You always told me family takes care of family. So why was I the only one who ever did? Then I walked toward the door, past the busser, past the hostess, past the heavy glass doors with the brass handles. Nathan caught me near the coat check. Ma'am, he was holding my receipt. Thank you, he said. Quiet, sincere. I touched his shoulder. You're doing great, I told him again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. Thursday evening, warm air, cicadas starting up in the landscaped trees that made the Belvedere look like it belonged somewhere more important than a strip mall. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky note still pressed to my steering wheel. One dinner, then home. One dinner. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in. Mom, Aunt Linda, Brooke, Cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all typing at once. A cascade of exclamation points and accusations, and that particular brand of fury that only comes from people who've just been caught. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the notification confirm it. Nora has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine, and I drove home in the same silence I'd driven there in. Except this time, the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night, or the next day, or the day after that. The group chat I'd left carried on without me. I know because Cousin Megan, the one who'd sent the birthday text, reached out to me separately a week later. "I just wanted you to know," she wrote. "That was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family dinner in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it." Megan was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Brooke texted, not to apologize, but to ask whether I could lend her first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished her well. She didn't write back. Through Megan, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. Dad's contracting business had folded 18 months before the dinner. Bad bets on 2 commercial projects that went sideways. Mom had been covering the minimums on 4 credit cards with a home equity line that was now maxed out. The house went on the market in July. They moved into a smaller rental in a town 30 minutes south. Brooke took a job answering phones at a dentist's office. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made long before I ever walked into the Belvedere. And none of it was mine to fix. I did what I'd promised at the table. I called Dad 6 weeks later and offered to sit down with him and a financial counselor. He hung up. I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. What I learned is this: the most expensive thing you can ever buy is other people's comfort with your silence. And the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally got rich. That's my story. 16 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.